All right, so I have my layout over here, and we need to talk about D1 because we have not talked about that one yet. If you have just one little lonesome piece, you know, nothing that it needs to sew or attach to, then all you need to do is just put a dab of glue. And I'm just looking to see which side I like better. Sometimes I like the back better. And one of my quilters a number of years ago kindly pointed out you have two sides of fabric, so you really have two different fabrics. And I thought that was really sweet of her to say. So you never really make a mistake because you have two pieces of fabric, or two sides of the fabric. So what you may not be able to see is I decided that this was the right side. And so I want for the templates, because this is piece number 1 in a template, we want the wrong sides to go together and the right sides are facing out. So we have, I mean, you know, it's a little bit silly because we sew on the back, but the printed side and the printed side, that might be a better way to say it. So the right side of the fabric and the printed side of the template. So that's what we've got going on there, and I am just going to give this just a little hack. Okay, so that should make sense there. Okay, so for the template, remember this is the front, we've sewed on the back. Now the reason I brought this out is because I want you to determine what are the outside pieces going to be, and then where your outside is going to be. So we have an outside here, and an outside here, and an outside here. So for D1, that means that I am going to be trimming just one section. Okay, so handy dandy ruler, same thing as before. Nothing, friends, has changed. This is where the precision really comes into play, and I want you to focus a little bit of extra attention. This will start to come more naturally, but this is where the beauty of foundation paper piecing really comes together, is when all of the pieces inside of the block match up perfectly. It makes a beautiful picture, and that's what we want. We have gone to the effort to sew this really pretty picture. We want to make sure that, you know, we're not left wondering what that is, or when somebody looks at our quilt, they're like, I don't really know what that is. So take some time to line up. Remember, if you've noticed, I've been using the same side of my ruler the entire time. And I never use another side of the ruler. I've just gotten in a habit. This tape is really worn, but I can see this is always the side that I'm always going to use. Line up the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we are going to ruthlessly trim this guy down. So you might also be tempted to take a pair of scissors and carefully trim right along this line, but what you will notice is that it's off just a little bit. That is okay. I want you to use your rotary cutter, and I want you to use your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and trust the ruler and trust your rotary cutter. Do not, under any circumstance, trust yourself with scissors, because when we hold things up like this, the fabric underneath is going to shift and we don't hold it straight, and then all of a sudden our seam allowance is not correct. So this is another place that people really like to use the Add a Quarter ruler, and I have nothing against them. I think it's a really fantastic company, and it has really great merits and has a really great place, but I have found for best results that it does not work really well with foundation paper piecing. Okay, so let's look at the layout, what we have here. And remember, the layout is going to be on the front. This is industry standard, that the layout shows you the front of what the block is going to look like, and the templates are the back, because, you know, it's just sewing the mirror. So we're going to put this on this side, because we have it on the right, we're going to put it on the left. So then I see that this is going to be an outside piece here. Oops, that's not it. No. So this is going to be an outside. So that means that I'm going to trim these pieces here. Okay, line up your ruler with, so your 1/4 inch seam allowance marking is going to be on top of your seam allowance for where you are going to sew the template pieces together. Okay, we have first one done. Remember to breathe. I'm over explaining things so that you have a really good idea of how all of this works. It's really not that hard. You've got this. You know how to do this. Same thing. Line up the 1/4 inch marking with the top of that sew line. All of the solids are sew lines. Okay, and we're going to do the bottom because we are attaching D to C. Okay, so we're going to do this. All right, so now we see A has 2 sides. We have this is an outside here, and this is an outside. Cut that off, and then the bottom. All right, now you can see that I've left that little triangle. That is going to be just fine. All right, now, what do we have here? Okay, this is going to be an inside, so this is the outside, and this is the outside. So we're going to leave those outside pieces, and we're going to trim what's on the inside. Okie dokie, so let's lay these back out so we can see them. Where did D go? There's D. Okay. So we're going to sew B to C. This is where it gets to be really, really fun. Also, some precision. So grab your favorite pins. If you haven't been using pins before, you will want to use them now because this is where things they like to shift, and I like things to stay as nicely and neatly as possible. All right, let's lay these back out again here. So what we need to do is we need to create a straight line when our template pieces, when it's joined together, we want it to be straight. So then when we sew this, it's going to be straight and it's not going to be wiggly. So what I like to do is I like to take one piece, and this here, and this here. Okay, did you see that? We had this. We always sew right sides together. So I'm going to flip one up. I like to have the bigger one on the bottom because then I can see if things are going to be shifting. And we're going to have the smaller one on top. Now, here's the other thing that gets to be really irritating, is not every printer is accurate. Even though you'd think that this was generated by a computer, or generated on a computer rather, that it would be totally accurate, and it's not. So I don't cut these little dog ear pieces because I've noticed that sometimes I need to have that little bit of extra fabric. Now I've been twisting this around, and that's fine because this needs to create the straight edge here. So I'm going to put my fingers along the seam allowance, and I want to see if there is going to be a straight edge here. And you can see that there is just a tiny little itty bitty amount that is not exact. And again, I don't know if I could stress it enough. I really like to have that precision. I will go out of my way to make sure that it is precise because I just love having it precise. So all I've done is I've closed it back up and I've moved it down just an itty bitty bit. Okay, and we're looking to see, we're closer. This is where it's really helpful that I put a little bit of glue, because this is a place that the fabric would like to slide back out. Okay, I am pretty comfortable with that. And we're going to put a pin there. You can see that this is shifted. So we've got a pin here, but I'm going to hold it down just in case, and we're going to shimmy this guy back over. Now that peak method is something that I use an awful lot. Get really, really comfortable with folding this over. You can create kind of a hard crease a little bit, but fold it over and see what you have going on here, because this is where you want to have a straight line. Anytime you have your template pieces that are going to be joining together, you want to make sure that they create a really straight line so that you won't have any shifting or bowing, because then that's when things can get to be a little bit wonky. You can adjust them later by, cutting the seam, but then that's where it starts to get really, you start to lose your seam allowance, basically. If you have some bowing in your template piece, then your piece starts to get a little bit wonky, and then you've been cutting into your seam allowance. So that's one of the biggest reasons, because it happens, especially on larger blocks. You need to have that extra amount, to really make sure that you're going to have a really straight edge or a really straight block when it's all done. Okay, so smaller piece is on the top, larger piece is on the bottom, and we're going to sew a little bit before to a little bit after. Now we have this really great little tail here, and these can become a real pain, especially if you don't have enough fabric that's over here. This is why I over-explain where we have our fabric placement, because we want to have this little itty bitty tail. And if you only have a tiny tail that's right here, I would still go in, I would get something pokey, and you want to pull the tail up. But I always want to make sure that I have a little bit of extra fabric so that I have a large enough tail. I can pull this up, and then I don't have any frayed bits that are hanging out. I have a complete blog post about this. It's called How to Deal with Tails, or How to Deal with Acute Angles. I don't remember which, but that has a lot of photos. That is a really common issue with all of us, myself included. Sometimes I forget that, I need to have that tail. So that blog post is on my website if that would be helpful for you. But if you give yourself enough extra fabric, you shouldn't have this problem. But do pull out the tail, and you'll pull it up as I just showed you. Then that won't get stuck in the seam allowance, or in the seam rather. It will be hidden within the seam allowance, and you can snip it off or you can leave it once it's all sewn. Okay, so this is where it gets to be so exciting. Okay, before we remove these little fancy bits, we want to make sure that we have a straight line, and we do. Ta-da! So if you're sewing with me and you have a straight line or a straight-ish line, pat yourself on the back. Give yourself a round of applause, because this is the funnest but also one of the most tricky parts of paper piecing. So I like to remove my papers or my seam allowances now, because I really like to have a nice flat block. The flatter, the better. And that is why I love the Project Wool pressing mats, because they just make a flat block even flatter, even with these, because with paper piecing you have all of that bulk. So then we're going to flip it over, and I don't remove the seam allowance papers until I've checked to make sure that the block is accurate. I've done it before where I'm like, oh yeah, sure, it's gonna be fine, and it ends up not being, and then it's really sad. You can fix it, but it starts to get really flimsy. Okay, so let me pull my mat over so you can see what I'm doing here, I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, if you haven't noticed. And I do have strong opinions about this, but I don't think that this is one that there's not a really a right or wrong way. Whereas with the method, I do think there is a right and a wrong way. This is my way of pressing. I like to press my seams open because when you have a lot of bulk here, if your seams are not pressed open, you're going to have a spot that is really unruly, and it makes for a really difficult block that does not want to lay flat. And then it also makes it really difficult to trim that puppy because it does not want to lay flat. Okay, so I'm pressing my seams open. But if your preference is to press to one side, that's fine. You can try both ways. This is just my preference. Okay, so we have that. Yay! Hallelujah. All right, so then we're going to join A to C. And remember I said I don't really care what's going on up here. I've got extra fabric. What I do want is I want to make sure that this is going to be a straight line. And I want to make sure that this side of the mountain and this side of the mountain align perfectly. So you might be really tempted to line up these, but if you have something inside of the block that should be lined up so that they come to a perfect point, I would encourage you to not worry about a straight line, and I would focus more about what is going on inside of the block. Okay, so this is going to be one that I've broken my rules. I think, yep, because this has a greater tendency for all of these little pieces to start shifting. So this is kind of how I determine which side is going to be on the top. So the last one we sewed them together, B was on the bottom and C was on the top. For this one, I'm going to have BC on the top and A on the bottom so that this doesn't shift. This will stay put, and this, because the pieces are larger, there is more glue, this is just going to be a lot easier to maneuver. So what I'm doing is I'm getting this close to the tree and the mountain underneath, and this is where it's a little bit tricky, but I hope you can see this. What I'm doing is I'm still using that finger method, and I'm leaning over to the side to see at this angle. I don't want to move my right hand, so my non-dominant hand, I don't want it to move at all because I'm holding this down. It's basically acting like a pin, but I don't want to put pins in here. I have found that the pins just don't work as well as fingers, and so I have one finger on this seam and one on this seam, and it's this seam right here that I'm most concerned about because I want it to match up right here. I want these two pieces to match up. So I'm just going to bend over and I'm going to take a peek. Oh gosh, there's a fuzz. Oh man, start over. Okay, so here we can see, hopefully you can see this, that it's going to be off just a tiny little bit. And you might be okay with it, and that's just fine. I will not say, oh, you did a terrible job if it doesn't match up perfectly, because you are learning, and that would be just a jerk move for me to say that. I will never ever say that to you. But I like to be really precise and as exact as I possibly can. So I'm just going to keep wiggling this around. And you'll see that this has shifted a little bit, and okay, so I need to move this around again. Okay, I've just pulled it down just a tiny bit. You know, I'm really not a perfectionist in life. I think this is the only thing that I strive for, you know, perfection. I think because, you know, life cannot be controlled at all. But if it is within my ability to make the block turn out as much like the picture, that's what I want. Okay, so I'm content. I did my looking underneath. And when you do this, it will make a lot more sense to you. You can't see what I am doing, but I stand up when I cut, when I cut and I press, and I sit down when I sew. So when I'm doing this looking so that I can get the best angle, I'm standing up and looking at it from the side and really only focused on this area here. And you can see I'm off a little bit, but that's okay. This is something that I'm perfectly content with. I just don't like when it's not, you know, not closer. Like, oh man, I could have done better. But give yourself so much grace, friend. You're learning a new skill. So if you are not perfectly accurate on your first try, it is okay. You can, you have a few choices. You can remove it and you can try it again. I don't like that because the fabric or the paper starts to get compromised, but you can. That's another option. What I would do instead of removing it is I would sew another block, and I would sew it until you're comfortable with it. Because remember, all we're learning how to do right now is master the method. And before you know it, you're going to be watching movies and listening to podcasts while you sew these wonderful blocks, and you'll be sewing your memories, and you will just have so much joy. Right now, it is a little bit overwhelming, and that's okay because you're learning a new method. All I want you to do is focus on the new method. So, you know, this gets to be kind of an upper level, kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? Upper level technique. But you can do this. I know that you can. I have not lost a student yet. So anyway, let's sew this together. Now this is a place because I'm going to, this is going to be the outside of the block. I want to go up here to all the way down here. I don't think I mentioned that before. So when it's an outside piece, when I'm joining the templates together, I should say, when I'm joining the templates together, it doesn't matter if it's an outside piece, joining the templates together, I want to start up here and then go all the way to the end. But when you're just sewing inside, you don't need to sew all the way across. And I think that would be a bad idea if you did sew all the way across, because it just wouldn't, you'd run into a lot of issues. Okay. When you are done with your block, I hope that you post a picture of it in my community group. We would love to see it and cheer you on, and everybody loves fawning over the blocks. That's like the highlight of our day. So whether it looks great or not, look at that. Oh, I'm so pleased with that. That turned out really well. It's off a little bit, but I'm really pleased. Oh, this is so beautiful. I love it. Oh, I love them coming together. So our group is so friendly and so encouraging. Nobody has ever said anything nasty, so I know it's really a lot to put yourself out there and to be brave, especially when you're learning something new and not fully confident in your skills. But I guarantee you, everybody is going to say, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You did such a great job. And people will probably ask where you got your fabric and all of that fun stuff. Okay, so we are going to press these open, and it feels so good when you're encouraged, especially when you've done something really difficult and you have overcome. And you know, for a lot of people, this method is really, really daunting because it has been explained in a really bad way. I hope this has been really clear for you, and I hope it becomes your favorite method, because it doesn't have to be, you know, this really big mystery. And it doesn't have to be a method that only a few people sew. All right, so let's see. Oh, that's getting steamy. I use an extra mat underneath that I don't like to keep my table protected. Okay, so, oh man, I love this. So here you can see just a little bit that the fabric and the paper have started to shift. And that's the biggest reason why I really, really like using the glue stick, because at least I know that it's being held in place. Okay. Oh, I hope you're so excited with your block and what you've been doing. So let's see what we have going on here. So what I'm going to do is I kind of roughly placed where I thought they would be. And because I've cut extra fabric, I'm really not going to be too terribly concerned about whether it's really precise or not. So I'm going to not break my rules, because already I could tell that it was going to shift and I wasn't going to be happy with it. So it's just the same thing as all of the template pieces before. We want to make sure that we have enough seam allowance. So we have D1 underneath, and I want to make sure that because this piece here is just a little bit of a slope, I want to make sure that I have enough fabric that is going to be here so that I can trim up my block. And we can see that we're off just a little bit right over here. So we're going to pull this guy down because the pin has already held it in place. Now, what I'm going to do, because this, we were really concerned about this here joining and matching, that this, if you look at this, it's not a straight line. It's off just a little bit. And oh my goodness, what do? Have no fear, we have a straight edge on this side. So even though the pins are on the other side, don't worry about it. I'm going to remove that pin as soon as I get my presser foot down. So I'm going to line it up where I want it to be. My hand is on top of the template piece, and I'm going to reach underneath and I'm going to pull that pin out because I don't want that pin to shift anything. Oh, another thing, it's been a long time since I've seen people do this. Some people like to use quilting clips to hold their pieces together as they are sewing, as they're joining them together. And I don't like these either because you have this extra bulk. So what's going to happen is the piece is going to shift. So I really like having the, I'm really obsessed with using the pins because they don't take up any space. I can make sure that things are accurate. Now what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I'm going slow enough. I like to sew really fast, but I want to make sure that I'm going slow enough that if there's going to be any shifting, I can move it back into place. But this is a small enough piece, I don't think that it should. And if you think that you have a template piece that it's, kind of shifting as you're putting it together, put a pin in the middle, and that will really help you keep it all together. The last piece is always my favorite. It is just the cherry on the top of ice cream. And another thing that I didn't say before is you want to make sure that you're not pulling your template pieces through, that you're letting the machine do the work. Using a walking foot is really not necessary, but make sure that you're not pushing it through and you're not pulling it from the back side. So this actually didn't do too bad. Sometimes it does get off a little bit, but I would not be concerned about this at all because it's going to be a straight enough edge when we press it. Okay. This is so exciting. Now, like I said, the best thing to do would be to make sure that you did sew the piece together properly, but so, you know, do as I say and not as I do. I've just sewn this one enough times that I know that I know that it will come out properly. Isn't that exciting? So this is one that I'm going to press the seam to one side. And the reason is because there is nothing else going on in this D section that I want to make sure that I give bulk to where these pieces are going to be joined up to the D side and not to these other places. So if it's just one piece, I usually just press it to that side. Oh man. So in hindsight, I might have used a different fabric for the tree, but I really think it's going to be okay. I think it looks really pretty. Then the focus is on the beautiful flowers. We went on a trip this summer and the flowers were so lovely. They were purple like this and it was misty, really lovely. Okay, so remember I said I really like this one for trimming the template pieces, but I prefer this larger Creative Grids. This is a 6x12 because it's just a bigger size, so it works out a lot better. So what I end up doing is I always end up rotating. This doesn't have tape because I want to be able to see what we've got going on here. So, okay, good. You can still see that. I am going to line up. I'm not really concerned about the precision of the difference between this side and these sides, because the precision goes on inside of the block and not outside. What I am most concerned about is getting a square block and it's not wonky off to one side or the other. So, and you can see that these are off, and that is just fine. I'm going to look at what do we have going on down here, and if this is going to be straight, you know, I don't want it to be too far off on either side. And I just kind of play around with it and think of what would I like it to look like on the back side, or on the front side, I mean, because I'm working on the back side. And it's only off just a little bit that I don't think it would matter. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to line up here and over here. And, you know, mountains are not level, the ground is not level. So I'm going to get it levelish. And you can see that I'm way off. It's okay. It's going to be just fine. You can see these here, way off. Totally fine. This is why we do not cut. Let me bring this up here. You can see this. See? This here is why we don't cut the template pieces. But the front looks just fine, and we have a perfect square. Okay, so then, so your unfinished size for this block will be 5 inches by 5 inches. Finished is 4.5 by 4.5. And I just keep kind of moving these around until I get a right edge here. And oh, isn't that fun? I love it. Well, friends, thanks so much for joining me. I cannot wait to see your block. I can't wait to see you embark on making a national park quilt with all of your memories and milestones. I can't wait to see where you place this block. What does it remind you of? Where have you seen this before? The great thing about this is it just helps your memories to come alive. And it's so fun to recreate all of those memories and milestones and put them in a quilt. And dreams really are sweeter beneath a national park quilt. I hope to see you again soon. Bye, friends.